wait maybe like a minute or so just to see, well, just to let everyone join. We've got quite a few signups for this one. So we're just going to just hold fire for just a moment. James, I'm going to put you on the spot mainly because you're having a sip to drink. But any new product updates that you're particularly happy about? I think I saw an email that came out from you in the last week or so.
Oh, we've had some ones that there's lots of gatekeepers, clients and users as well that are really excited about. My favorite is the workflow diagram generator. I didn't know which one you thought I was going to mention there, but that's
No
my
idea.
favorite because I've been waiting for it for a long time. So a big part of workflows that quite a few people on this call and this webinar might know about is that all the underlying functionality is like hidden behind the scenes to keep them looking neat. But that also means it's quite hard when you're looking at them to see what happens. There's a feature that's just gone live, like a week ago, where workflow admins can go and click now, and Gatekeeper will instantly load up a diagram flowchart that shows you all of the underlying like transition rules and actions that take place at each phase. That was big when
Okay,
internally we
that's a good
love that
one.
one.
Yeah, no, absolutely, it's good. Maybe we can show that in success hours next month that we're doing. We're doing that on contracts, but I think we can show off maybe a contract process and just show how that visualization looks there.
Yeah.
Awesome, cool.
Yeah.
I'd say we can get started,
Good
Lucy,
to get
if
started.
you're ready to go. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that sounds great. So, hey everyone, welcome to our Market IQ webinar. My name's Lucy Chu, and I'm the Learning Experience Chapter Lead here at Gatekeeper. And I'm joined by James Ince, our Learning Experience Designer, Daniel Barnes, our Community Manager, and we also have Richard Rowe, who's our Senior Account Executive. For those of you who have joined our previous Success Hours webinar, you'll find that this one is a little bit different than what you'll be used to. Today, there will be no configuration, but we'll be demoing MarketIQ and discussing how it'll help manage your third-party risk with your vendors. And we'll be covering the MarketIQ financial, cyber, screen, and ESG best practice workflow. As always, feel free to ask questions throughout the session by using the Q&A or the chat box at the bottom of your screen. And with that, I'll pass it over to you, Daniel.
Hey, yeah. So as always, we're going to start this off with a poll. James, can you run this poll?
Yeah, I'm going to have to take off the loading screen,
I think
which we don't need anymore.
Excellent, cool. We have that on screen. This is a multiple choice one. We'll give you like 30 seconds, a minute to go through this. One thing I just wanted to like nerd out real quick before I hand over to Richard to start showing us some cool stuff with MarketIQ is that there was a recent study done by Security Scorecard, who we'll be mentioning throughout this webinar, and 98% of companies have had one of their vendors breached in the last 2 years, and that's on a cyber side of things. It's kind of a really scary statistic. Especially considering how large some of your supply chains are. So it kind of brings to prominence the need to be doing effective risk management in this space. James, did you want to cover anything before we close this poll?
No, I would be interested to see the different solutions people have on this, because I mean, Rich and Daniel, you and I have been talking about what we've generally experienced from Gatekeeper clients and prospects around the risks that they do manage up front. So it was interesting that you raised there, Daniel, that cyber is such a big one, because in our experience, not many people have many refined processes for that in place. So it'd be good to show some offerings that we have today in MarketIQ.
And these poll responses, I've gone through every single one of these in previous roles, from having no tech, having absolute no process, to having like very mature processes. So yeah, it's good. Awesome.
I want to give a little shout out to Russ, who said Gatekeeper isn't on the list on the poll. So cheers, Russ.
Yeah, we funny enough, we just took that off, didn't we? But never mind that. Yeah, no worries. Awesome. Richard, I am going to ask you to maybe talk a little bit about MarketIQ and just show off a little bit around the repository and that kind of thing. We're then going to move on to workflows and give you a nice presentation of what MarketIQ can do for you. So Rich, I'm going to hand over to you.
Yeah, so I guess before we kind of show MarketIQ and kind of what we can do and stuff like that, I usually find it helpful to kind of explain how people manage it today and kind of what the problems are with that. So I guess when we talk about risks associated with third-party vendors, it's is really, really broad, right? And that covers legal risk, it could be cyber, it could be financial, ESG is a common one, and there's many, many more. But when speaking with customers, it's pretty clear that it's typically kind of three main challenges with how companies manage all of that today. And the first one is disparate. The second one is it's all manual, and the third one's it's very static. So with disparate, what do I mean by that? So because you may have a finance team conduct a credit check, you may have compliance check on sanctions, you may have an IT team or a separate compliance team do infosec assessments, but often that information is stored in a variety of different places, and the teams who need to manage that risk doesn't have that visibility. So disparate data is one key area there. The second one is very, very manual. So because you have to navigate through different tools, you have to go through different teams, make those requests. It can be quite hard to gather that data. It can quickly become very time consuming to do that as well. And the third one, lastly, it's what do I mean by static? So from what I find from my customers and companies that I speak to, when companies do that kind of risk review, so when they assess that third-party risk, it's often done once. It's often done at the start of that relationship. So when you're just about to start that engagement. And what that means is you might do that initial check, but then it's pretty much instantly out of date. Then you often find that they're not being checked again for another year at least, or even in some cases, they're not checked at all. Yeah, exactly. They're not checked at all until like a renewal is coming up. And that's not throwing any kind of shade to people that don't do those checks. Sometimes because it is very manual, like I said on the second point, you can't even do those checks routinely. It is just kind of unmanageable and unsustainable. But the problem with that is, a lot can change in 12 months. So you run the risk of being reactive, or you may have an embarrassing situation where, I don't know, you're like Okta or British Airways and one of your suppliers got breached or something like that, and you're in the news, right? So you don't want to be that company, or you don't want to have that happen to you. So you want to do as much as you can to mitigate that. And the way things are done at the moment is it's very kind of old, static, and very disjointed. So that's how companies tend to manage it at the moment, and the risk with that. That's where MarketIQ comes in. So James, if you can share your screen, show kind of Gatekeeper. We'll actually give a glimpse to everyone on MarketIQ. And I see a few familiar names on the list, quite a few of my customers. So you might have seen some of this already, but we'll go into some of the details in a second. So if you go into one of the vendor records, if you click into MarketIQ, so MarketIQ is a relatively new service of ours, and we've basically partnered up with market leaders to get this data. So for example, you've got MarketIQ to give you that single lens on all of your supply risk and ensure that checks, any checks, approvals, any notifications in change of that risk is all automated. So as an example, right now you're on the finance page. So this is partnered with our friends at CreditSafe. So they're one of the market leaders in credit risk, compliance, and that kind of thing. So what we do is we ingest automatically the credit risk data. So you'll see where it says B, it says low risk from a MarketIQ financial perspective, and it'll show you that change over time. And then if you scroll a little bit to the bottom as well, you'll notice that there's a full credit report. So most of the people that I speak to, they only really care about the high level score, and then they can kind of go away with it. But if, for example, it is a very low score, you might want to dig into details with those reports. So the first element of MarketIQ is that financial side of things, that financial risk. One thing it probably is worth mentioning that most companies I speak to, they do some sort of credit check with some companies, but it's not very clear when they do that. Sometimes it could be in a complete separate tool by a separate team. And so it's very hard to have that all in one place. So the first element of this is that financial side from CreditSafe. The second part is, yeah, go on.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add to that point. Like I've used a couple other tools pre-Gatekeeper, being introduced to it by yourself there. And it was awful, right? Because you take it out that tool, and typically you don't have it anywhere to store everything. So you're taking it from that system, you're doing it one time, like you mentioned at the start, and then you're trying to like put it into a SharePoint drive, or emailing it to people to get reviews. And that disparate way of working just absolutely means it's not scalable in any way. So yeah, it's a really good point you made there.
And the other thing just to kind of add is like when there are companies that I work with that already use CreditSafe, or it could be something like Experian or other tools out like DNB, for example. And you'll often get that credit report, and that's just a file, right? So if you need to know what's going on, you need to dig into that file and dig into details. It's not very quick to access. So yeah, having it all in one place is key. And I think the other element that's important to highlight is obviously you're seeing all the changes over time on that graph, but anytime that score changes, so once CreditSafe, who are again the market leader, anytime anything changes around that, it instantly brings it into Gatekeeper. So you're always up to date with that. The second element of MarketIQ is the cyber side. So James, if you click on cyber, second one there. So on the far right of this screen, you see kind of a yellow hexagon B with 85 low breach probability, right? So that's coming from another market leader called Security Scorecard. So they're incredibly good at coming up with these scores and algorithms to basically judge the risk, the cyber risk of these companies. And so again, in a very similar fashion, Security Scorecard pulled this data in for us. We only need the domain name, so the website of that company, and we can pick this up. And you'll see those changes over time as well. So the key thing is you've got the financial side, you've got the cyber side all in one place, and you've got the market leaders providing that information for you. The third element is, and James, I see you're about to click it, is MarketIQ Screen. So again, going back to CreditSafe, we're leveraging what they call CreditSafe Protect. So we're bringing all of that into Gatekeeper. So what that means is you can check for sanctions. It could be OFAC lists, it could be adverse media. Depending on the kind of sector that you're working in, there may be very strict requirements around this, especially if you're financial services sector, you need to check on this quite a lot. And so you can do all of these checks and bring that data in from inside of Gatekeeper. So again, the whole point is everything's in one place, everyone can see the right information, and it's all up to date in real time. I guess probably the only other part to mention, especially on the repository side anyway, is if you click onto the files section, I think that's probably the key area there. So those of you that I work with, so those of you that are my customers, because I can definitely see a few names that I recognize, you'll know that when you do supply due diligence, you're gathering information, you're gathering documentation, you want all of that stored in here, and it will automatically store that here. The same goes for the credit reports. Every time a new credit report is generated, it's storing every single one for you. So if you ever need to go through kind of previous versions or go into the detail, you can. The whole point is everything is there to give you that visibility and help you act accordingly if you need to.
Yeah, that's a good point to raise, actually, isn't it? That every time you mentioned this, and when we're on the MarketIQ tab, whenever there's a change in the market, like CreditSafe or Security Scorecard, that value, like the credit rating and the risk and so on, will pull through here. But the new version of the credit report will pull through here as well. So anyone who happens to be looking at the files tab for a vendor record opens this up in our PDF previewer, they'll be looking at that latest version as well.
Yeah. And quite often when you go through audits as well, you want to kind of be able to prove all of that. So you want to show all that information and all that audit trail.
Yeah, I was literally just about to say that, Rich. Like, it's an auditor's dream, right? This I've had to present this information to them, and I can tell you, it's sometimes not very fun.
Yeah, I mean, one of my customers, I can't see her on the list today, but one of my customers, Alison, she, whenever there's an internal audit, she'll literally just bring up this screen. She'll show the forms to do all the due diligence audit trail. She'll show all the different key elements in the risk module as well. So she literally just shows that and then it's done. So it's quite straightforward because it's really hard to try stay compliant in the first place, but it's sometimes even harder to prove that you're staying compliant. So just having it all in one place makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, that's valid, actually. Since you mentioned forms, I guess we'll just highlight that because it's a feature that not sure all Gatekeeper users are aware of, but if there are workflow processes that our clients are using for these, due diligence checks, compliance reviews, if you go to the forms tab of a vendor or a contract that has been through one of those processes, you'll be able to see it in the forms tab and see, the current status of it, when that last update took place. And this only has one particular due diligence review that's been through, but if it's a vendor that you've been doing business with for a long time, you may very well have multiple ongoing, yearly reviews, performance reviews, things like that, and they'll be listed out here. So nice audit level view for vendor records as well.
I'd definitely say this is like a proper hidden gem. It's definitely underrated, but as soon as you go into it, so if you click into that ESG due diligence form, you might not have much because it's just more of a demo setup, but any notes, any approvals, all of that process are all stored here. So if you ever need to go back and refer to a company that you onboarded 3 years ago, you want to check that you've done the right due diligence every year. It's a certain criticality. If you want to see all of that detail, you just show that here. So yeah, definitely good to call out this.
Yeah. And you can always dig a bit deeper as well if you want to know about the specific process, like who was involved in it, who filled out certain forms. You can follow the link from that forms tab directly into the workflow if you're really bothered about not just the information and the notes that were collected, but who was involved in approvals and things like that. You can do that too. But yeah, definitely agree. It's a hidden gem of a tab in Gatekeeper.
And so going back to kind of what I was talking about, how companies try to manage it before using something like Gatekeeper as an example. If things are stored in different places, things are just done over email. When they have to prove certain things, when they go through audits, they just have to get loads of different email threads that have to save. They have to put it into a folder. They have to share it with the auditors. It can be a very, very big pain. So yeah, just having everything in one place makes it a lot easier for the teams.
Awesome. Are we going to jump into screen as well as part of this?
We looked at it briefly. I can show it a touch more on the workflow side when we get to the vendor onboarding if you want, Daniel. But we jumped into
just
it.
Cool. I mean, just to show how we can do it on the workflows. That's cool. We'll do it then.
Okay. Jump in.
My favorite thing is whenever I show a customer this, I always put their company name in and see what comes up.
That's scary.
It's very, very powerful.
Yeah. Let's not do that live.
No.
Awesome. Cool. James, are we firstly, can you just show me the ESG side now? We've got that ESG tab over on the right hand side there. We've got some cool stuff in there to show off.
So this is a custom tab, and for those of you that follow Gatekeeper releases, this is a relatively recent feature itself, being able to segment and organize your data in this way. So this is a hint at what we're going to look at when we look at the ESG best practice workflow process that Lucy mentioned at the top of the call. So what we have here is a specific set of form data that we've collected from the vendors whilst they've been going through their onboarding and due diligence processes, specifically relating to ESG. At the top, we've got a summary about their statuses. So the fact that they've completed that ESG review, the date they completed it, and the date of their next assessment. But as I expand these other sections here, and this is a very minimal ESG assessment form, we've got some other inputs that they provided via workflows that have made their way into this vendor custom tab here.
Yeah, that's great. Appreciate it. And just to mention that these tabs can be used for other data points. Any custom data point can be used for this. It's a really nice feature for sure.
It's also worth adding that like all those points you see, so for example, ESG assessment status, the next ESG assessment, it doesn't have to be just static with one vendor. You can actually pull that into vendor views. So an example could be, let's say I have my tier 1 suppliers. I want to get, when I'm proving that to kind of internal checks, I want to show all the different things that we've asked, all the documentation we've got. I can have that as a saved view. It could be if there's a list of companies that process data, again, I can show that stuff. So whilst on a tab, it might look like just for the one company, you can get more of a portfolio view if you need to as well.
Yeah. Just have to get it. Now that you've said that, I have to get it up and actually do it. So I'm going to
please do.
filter this view by my strategic suppliers. I'm going to pull in all that ESG data, and I can, like you said, I can save this as a new view called, I'll use the term you use there, Rich, tier 1 suppliers ESG. And so now in future, when I want to view the ESG responses across that subset of suppliers, so only 16 out of I think there's a few hundred in this tenant, then I can see those responses that were provided by them as part of their due diligence processes.
Yeah, that's great. We're gonna come back to save views later on, actually, aren't we? We've got a couple of bits to show off there, but for now, I think we're ready for our second poll, James. Appreciate it. So with this poll, we're just intrigued to see what kind of risks you are tracking at the moment, just to get a bit of insights. If anyone wants to let us know using the chat or the Q&A or whatever function that we've got here on this webinar, it'd be really cool to hear. I appreciate some of you might be doing some amazing things in the risk space, so it'd be really cool to see that. James, I think you had one point that you just wanted to cover off here about running the MarketIQ checks.
Yeah, so I know that we've talked about like the benefits of having this data centralized, it's not disparate, it's not in different systems, it's not hard to find for your own purposes and auditing and things like that. So just while people are filling out that poll, I want to highlight something that we're about to move on to next, and that's that obviously it's great having this here for your pre-existing vendors. Like if you are considering MarketIQ, you can get this in place for your pre-existing vendors and you can connect it in this repository view that we're looking at. And in fact, we'll show that towards the end of this webinar, like how you can do the manual connection here. But the better way, the way that we obviously recommend you get this done is much more slick. It's embedding it in your existing due diligence processes so that any vendors going through your initial onboarding risk assessments, first off, you're making sure that once they're done with them, you'll have this living data. Like Rich said, you don't want it to just be static at the point that you onboard them. You want that to be there so you can revisit it and see the current state of their vendor health, but also so that you can use it instantly at the point that you're doing onboarding, just to add a bit of intelligence to your processes. So in a second, I'm going to close this poll and we'll switch over views from out of our repository into some workflows just to see how we've got that set up in this Gatekeeper environment. Okay, so I'll end that one there. Cool.
Awesome. Looks like a lot of people covering a lot of risks there, which is yeah, amazing to see. Also, it's also really good to see that people didn't click "we don't track risk," so that's a really a really good one. We were just testing the waters there, so that's amazing to see. Yeah, appreciate it. So James, yeah, like you said, we're going to go on to workflows now. Like you said, best practice: do everything via workflows. They're your digital processes. Rich has already mentioned that. This creates really cool audit trails, and the way we create audit trails via forms is by putting all of our vendors, the contracts, through these digital processes. So James, I'm going to show off a little bit around vendor onboarding and how we can do these MarketIQ checks as we're onboarding our vendors through, which we've showed off in previous webinars, but I'll let you take over and show how this works.
Sure. So I'll click into this like standard. This is our best practice vendor onboarding workflow that has it's a fairly streamlined process. It's fairly simple. You've got a internal user requesting a vendor. It goes through certain approvals, and like you said, risk assessments and forms being filled out, things of that nature. But one thing that you'll notice on some of these cards is that the MarketIQ scores are already starting to display. And yeah, it's really simple basically to get MarketIQ connected whilst you're performing any other vendor risk assessments that you're doing on a workflow like this. So basically for the cyber side of it, so that security scorecard connection that Rich talked about earlier, where we're concerned with how likely they are for things like data leaks and data breaches, things of that nature, all you need to have connected is the website for your vendor. So as long as the vendor record gets created via this workflow and we have a few actions to automatically take form information about the vendor and turn it into a metadata record in our repository. For these ones that have the website populated, Gatekeeper's already pulled through a cyber rating automatically. We haven't had to have a user validate and vet that. Just check that the website's there. Gatekeeper will go and connect that automatically to the MarketIQ cyber module. The other credit safe, more orientated ones we have later on, it's a bit more of a manual task, but you can build it into the existing actions that are taking place on the workflow already. And you can see we've got some that are connected, but I'll just show one of these connections taking place so we get an idea as to what it looks like. So on this onboarding review phase where we've got Steel and Alloy Processing Limited that's nearing the end of its workflow, one of the final steps, now that we have all the metadata and form information we want filled out about this vendor, one of the final steps we're going to take is a member of an admin team like procurement or risk management will have a big blue button like this one where they can say, I want to connect this vendor to MarketIQ Financial. And when they hit this, Gatekeeper is going to take the data that we have collected so far, such as their registered address, company registration number, legal name, and it's going to go and run a search on CreditSafe's database. And as you can see, the reason this needs to be a manual action is because sometimes it might pull through a few possible matches. One thing that the system will present, though, is its confidence rating based on the information that you've got. And there's one that's 96, which I know is the appropriate one here. And all you need to do is validate the response that you get back is the appropriate one. And when you hit apply now, Gatekeeper is going to make that connection. And let me just refresh the page real quick because we can see at the top it's got the cyber score. If I refresh the card, we've also now got the financial score of A as well, which is the best score you can hope for when you make the connection at this point. And it's that simple to get both of those modules connected during an onboarding workflow like this. So if I were to leave this workflow now visit the vendor in the repository and go to the MarketIQ tab, what we'll see is that that dashboard that we saw with Atlassian a few minutes ago, it looks the same here because it's we've connected it to the same modules and we've got all that information ready. So when someone views this in the repository later, we'll have already made those connections whilst it's going through its initial checks.
Quickly, just because just on that part, I think a couple of questions are quite relevant to that. So Colvir was asking about you need to enter full company legal name to bring up the credit data stuff. So basically, as a best practice, it's best to have the legal entity name, the registered address, and the company number, the registration number, or kind of whatever number you have for them. Usually, especially if it's to do with like due diligence workflows, you would gather that data from the supplier themselves. So they would be inputting that information, and you use that as part of that information. But let's say worst case scenario, you don't have those three elements. You do have a fallback search to even just for the company name. So even if you don't have those extra details, you can do a search, but especially with like steel and alloy processing, I'm sure there's like a dozen companies that have a very similar name. So you want to get it as clear as possible. So ideally you have those three components, but you could do it with a name search as well. Yeah,
that's valid. I for the purposes of this demo, I made sure that I'd been thorough with the data that I provided here. But yeah, like you said, Rich, if the form is going to the vendor and it's being filled out by a key account manager internally to begin with, who has that relationship already, maybe they should have provided enough to go by so that when you make this search, you don't just have the company name, you have a bit more than that. But yeah, you're right that it will still provide a search regardless.
I mean, to give an example, like these due diligence questionnaires and that kind of assessment will, especially in my world, that's when I want to start working with a new customer, right? So I'm the supplier being onboarded. So it's in my best interest to provide all the information that's necessary to make that assessment. So that's why we kind of front load that onto the supplier to do that themselves. And then you can make sure that that's mandatory that they give that.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that both with the website to use for cyber and for registered address as an example, if you're doing this via a workflow as well, you can have a lot more control of the data that people have to provide in order for workflow forms to progress through that workflow. And yeah, if it's a new supplier that wants your business, then you can quite reasonably expect them to be able to fill out their own website and registered address before they submit their form.
Yeah, definitely. It's certainly in their interest. James, can you show how we can just do a really cool transition? I think there's...
Yeah. So this is the bit I mentioned where about using the data instantly to make these processes a bit smarter. So what we have here is the penultimate-ish step of this vendor onboarding workflow, but we've got an additional sort of warning phase here that's a financial risk assessment, like it's a red alert type thing. And how we've configured this workflow is that data that I just pulled through from MarketIQ financial can be used to say this vendor is either pre-approved and doesn't need this emergency risk assessment, or it's not pre-approved, it needs someone else to vet the relationship to confirm, are we actually happy to work with a vendor that has this level of risk? So this company here that I linked earlier is a D rating, which is, as you can see, the financial rating is classed as high risk. So when the actions are performed at this phase, like the procurement team has said, I've done everything I want to, I'm going to hit approve for this to move forward. We can see the card automatically transitions over to this financial risk assessment phase where it might assign itself to the finance and risk management team to check the details, confirm that are there mitigating actions that we can take as a company? Is there anything else that can be done, or do they just want to reject it and stop the onboarding at this point? However, this is the nicest scenario. What you can do is you can say that if the same thing happens with a vendor that is rated an A in this case, when the procurement team finishes their actions here and hits approve, because that A meets the criteria of just not needing to worry and perform any of the reviews, you can see the card jumps from this phase right through to vendor onboarded and marks the process as done and confirms at that point we're happy to work with them because they've completed they've passed our initial risk thresholds, and they've also completed all the necessary forms about this workflow.
Yeah, appreciate it. It's cool to see that we can use these data points to help transition various cards through the workflows. And whilst we're talking about workflows, let's jump into the contract review workflow. We're just going to quickly show how maybe a contract management team, a legal team can get a bit of visibility, because it's not just on the vendor sort of onboarding and vendor management workflows that you get this kind of information.
Yeah, and I'm going to keep calling out what Rich said earlier around disparate data, around the fact that the people who might be performing those credit checks at the start of the vendor relationship might not be the people who deal with the vendor on an ongoing basis. So what we have in this workflow is we have the same vendors that we saw on that other workflow. So we've got Rolls-Royce, we've got if I click into this one, some of you eagle-eyed people might have spotted Tesla on the other workflow. We've got the same vendors that are now going through a contract management process, but because those scores were collected as part of that vendor onboarding workflow, they're also now visible in this contract management one as well. So at this particular phase of the workflow, a new fleet lease agreement has been requested, and it's about to go into its draft negotiation and creation phase. And that contract management team, who might not have seen the history as the risk assessments and reviews that were completed, at least get that instant visibility here. Okay, so this vendor, when it went through that initial check, was graded a D for its cybersecurity risk, and it was graded a C for its financial, because that could influence the tasks that they need to perform when drafting out contractual terms and clauses and things of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely, James. It's a good one. It's something I used to talk to my former GC about, and we didn't have MarketIQ because it was still a baby being created, and only Richard and I were just talking about it in the very early days. So yeah, it would have been amazing to have that on my contract review screen every single day, so I could just kind of appreciate the risk levels coming in, especially on the cyber stuff with a lot of SaaS past kind of platforms that I was regularly contracting with. So really appreciate that. Awesome, James. We are going to move on. We're going to get off of this contract workflow now, and we're going to go and take a look at the best practice ESG workflow. Some people may have seen this on some of our previous webinars, but we're just going to have a quick run through of that one now.
Sure. So this one's a really simple process. It's a much more stripped down version than that vendor onboarding workflow, for instance. And the framework of this one, it's designed to function in tandem with due diligence processes like a thorough vendor onboarding. So basically how this one will work is there'll be ESG assessments. And if you remember back when we looked at that custom tab that you called out, Daniel, the ESG assessments that vendors will be completing here on behalf of their company is what's going to make its way into the repository in that custom tab. So it's a really simple process. How it will work is when this workflow is triggered, probably by either one of two scenarios. Either you're creating a new vendor relationship and onboarding them, and you want this to take place in tandem, or, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, it comes up for its refresh because you want to keep a read on the most up-to-date information. They'll be notified, all users of Tesla, or any users that we've got logged into Gatekeeper, be able to come, provide their information here, fill out these form sections, and we've got the same ones that we had in that custom tab. So sustainability, governance, environmental, and social. And they'll simply be able to submit that for internal review. And like I said, it's a very simple process. Some internal risk management team will be able to review their answers in the same form. And provide notes. So Rich called that out earlier, that generally if you have a thorough process, you'll have people taking notes about their judgments and assessments that take place. And they'll be able to review the answers and the attachments that were provided by the vendor. And once they complete all of the necessary checks and capture their notes, I'm not going to do it just for speed on this demo. They capture their notes and they mark the process as complete. That card moves through to done. And if I follow this through to the repository now and open up the tab, Gatekeeper, open up the custom tab that we saw earlier. Gatekeeper will capture the ESG assessment's been completed. It will capture the date that happened and the next date that we're going to do a refresh. And the answers that were given by the vendor in that form automatically populate through to here from the tab. So people don't have to go and dig out the workflow card to find what the vendor was saying. It should all pull through, including responses, documents, anything like that.
Yeah, and like we showed earlier, like you can see all of this data as well in the saved view. So it's it kind of comes full circle, right? Like it's all down to, I would say, personal preference on this. James, whilst we're on this screen, I want you to talk about the next ESG assessment date and how that could be used for how we can do some automation here.
Sure. So yeah, that's the way of putting it. This is an automation field. So these two fields were calculated by the workflow at the point the card landed on that done phase we saw a second ago over in this tab. At the point the card lands here, Gatekeeper will capture the date that was completed, which is obviously today's date, and it will add, in this workflow, we've configured it to add a year to that. You might want to, depending on the vendors, like it could be a thing with your tier 1 vendors, it might be a quarterly review, or it could be a 6-monthly one, but we've just configured this to say in a year, set that to be the next assessment date. This isn't just a date field though. This is actually a field that's going to be used to re-trigger the workflow. So basically what's going to happen is in 365 days time, when this date is imminent, Gatekeeper will pull Tesla back onto that same workflow, notifying the users of Tesla, we need you to repeat this ESG assessment. So we've got up-to-date values for you. And the same thing will happen. They'll fill out the form, provide any up-to-date documents if they have them, and those will get committed back to that custom tab. And then the next assessment date will be November 2025. And it's a self-sustaining cycle. It's automated, so you don't have to worry about checking a spreadsheet like when did we last perform a due diligence assessment on Tesla. Like I'm going to have to reach out to my contact there. It's just that date will pull the vendor on, and it'll keep updating itself and recycling.
I mean, a company that I'm speaking to at the moment, she literally has a spreadsheet of all the next due diligence dates, and she has to check it each week. So that's when she then sends out the package. She goes through that process. So having it all automated is quite key. And I was going to say one thing to mention about that ESG best practice workflow, and there's actually an anonymous attendee question on this as well. But the best practice workflow is not the be all end all. It's more of a guideline of what can be done. So we have plenty of customers where they're facing a lot of pressures to do with ESG compliance, whether that's internal pressure or external pressure. And so some might not have even had the chance to say, okay, what kind of things do we need to ask around the ESG? So the best practice workflow is a good kind of jumping off point. So the question that somebody asked was like, is the off-the-shelf ESG workflow, can you customize the questions and be able to report on that? Absolutely. So this is just kind of our best practice example, but you can absolutely tailor it to your geography or your industry. It's completely customizable. Yeah,
that's a perfect point, perfect way to put it, because our best practice template ESG workflow comes with a quite long, exhaustive form because it covers all of the potential different reporting areas you might want to have for ESG. And it's definitely the case if this is the first time you're ever assessing your vendors for ESG, you might want to strip it down a bit, either change some of the questions that you're asking them, cut out some that aren't relevant to your industry or the vendors that you assess. And just like you've seen here, like I've got a very stripped down version because I've stripped it down because I want it to be easy to click through for this walkthrough on the webinar. but it's definitely the case that if you haven't assessed ESG yet, if you jump in and use the full best practice template form, it might be a bit much because it's just a lot of data, and if you don't have any purposes for it yet, there's a lot in there that you should consider customizing. No,
it's a really good point. Cheers, Rich, for bringing that up. Like you said, James, customizable as well. You've got a full guide on it as well to help people self-serve if they do have the ESG best practice workflow live. We're gonna
the other part sorry, Rich, go. Like the ESG doesn't have to be a standalone thing. Quite commonly, it's part of that assessment, and this person will know that I'm talking about them. But one of my customers, she's got like 700 odd questions on the due diligence questionnaire. So you can bake all of that ESG stuff into that and have it as one big behemoth if you need to. But again, it's just a jumping off point if you don't have that resource.
Does she use that same questionnaire for all vendors, or is it a certain tier that fill out the all 700?
I wish I could get to answer live, but it's conditional. It's conditional. It's not all 700.
Right. Okay. Yeah. We could call out in one of our Success Hours webinars, we talked about making conditional workflow forms that sort of open themselves up and expand based on the scope of the vendor that's being onboarded or the service that's being requested. So if you are interested in taking a 700 question form and making it smarter, then you can check that out on our knowledge base.
Awesome. Let's move on. And Rich, one thing I really want to talk to you about is how do we continuously stay on top of our vendors? How do we monitor? You spoke about at the start, it's typically like a one-time thing for a lot of other platforms out there. You do the check, it's typically out of date. Our platform's a little bit differently, and it's pretty cool. It's something I wish that I had and could have used when I was a practitioner. So we're going to talk about continuous monitoring here, and we have a workflow that we're going to just showcase a little bit here. So James, could you maybe go over to the workflow area and show this off? And Rich, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, so I guess when you go onto the vendor record, and no need to go to that, by the way. When you go onto the vendor record, you've got the credit score, you've got the cyber score. That's like a snapshot for that company. But you never want any user having to go into that and proactively checking these things. You just want them to be, okay, I'll just keep it in the background. I just want it to tell me if something's up, basically. And so what we can do is we can use the workflow triggers. So I think a good one would be the cyber monitoring one. So James, if you go to the triggers of, sorry, if you go back one step, and you go to trigger of that. Most of you on this webinar might already know this, but just as a refresher, a trigger is just, if this happens, automatically start this process. And again, as with anything with Gatekeeper, this can be flexible, right? So with the ones that James has got on this setup here, if the cyber rating is trending down, or if the cyber rating is turned into a C, D, or F, that kind of thing, we want to trigger this workflow. So that could be tailored, right? It could be, if it's a tier 1 supplier and it's trending down, we need this to happen next. If it's a, I don't know, tier 4, if it's a software category, we might need to kind of trigger that as well. If it's tier 4, we might need to have a slightly lower level version, but hopefully everyone can get what I'm saying. It's flexible on that side. So if you go into the actual workflow next, what this does is, what this will do is it'll bring on that supplier card and it'll highlight that in the workflow. So what would happen is certain individuals, it could be teams, it could be individuals, will get notified that this particular company has trended down. And that might not necessarily be a terrible thing. If you're going from an A to a B, it's not going to be a massive risk. But if it's dropped considerably, you could then start to assess that risk. And so that's the way where we're always going to keep you up to date with that stuff. So in that sense, I know, Simon, I know you had a question earlier about the kind of static result. All of the scores, all of the data in Gatekeeper is dynamic. So whenever security scorecard, whenever credit safe, whenever they update their data, it automatically comes in here and it will automatically trigger if it meets those requirements. So when it lands on here, let's say for your example, James, you've got the vendor management team gets notified of this. And then again, similar to the ESG best practice workflow, our kind of default workflow that we've got set up is just to let you know that's happened. And basically it allows you to then submit things to the supplier to ask for some feedback or confirmation of what's going on to see if anything can be mitigated. But again, this is just our example of a workflow. You can tailor it to how you guys want to do things in your own organizations. So the main point here is you don't have to keep checking these things. It will tell you as and when something has gone wrong, or not wrong, but when it's trending down.
Potentially gone wrong. Let's
potentially gone wrong.
No, let's not hide away from that. It could be wrong. And no, it's great, right? Because it, like, how I always kind of think about this is when I finish my day and I go to bed, when I wake up in the morning, turn my laptop on, I've got some potentially my vendors have trended downwards overnight, and it's just there waiting for me. I've got potentially even responses depending on how that workflow is set up. If it goes straight out to the vendors, I may even already understand maybe they've just failed to file a compliance statement or something like that, which is a typical one, right? That it causes a huge drop if you miss sort of a reporting deadline. So yeah, I absolutely love this. I think continuous monitoring like this is really helps elevate your maturity as a function. And James, you've kind of just jumped onto it. I was just going to mention this is the same for the credit side as well. So we're doing this with the credit scores and the cyber scores here.
Yeah, because it might be a different process, right? Sorry, Rich.
I was just going to say one thing because I can see a good example, because Randy asked a really good question because he's pretty eagle-eyed and a Gatekeeper expert. He mentioned that why is the D, let's say on that BT PLC, why is the D on the credit risk and the D on the security, cybersecurity, why is it like different colors, different shapes? It's a good question. So the reason we do that is because Credit Safe will have their own grading and their own color scheme, and Security Scorecard will have the same as well. So what we're very kind of mindful of is when we showcase that data via Gatekeeper, we want to show you the exact format, the exact color, the exact shape, the exact kind of jargon that they would use, because we're not a credit risk platform, we're not a cyber risk platform. We're taking the data and regurgitate it back in a useful way. So that's why the colors are slightly different, because it's one's a security scorecard color scheme and jargon, and the other one is a credit safe one.
Yeah, thanks for answering that.
So people who use those systems already, it's familiar to them. Yeah, you're right. So that one's security scorecard, that one's credit safe.
That's great. No, Rich, appreciate that run through there. James, we're gonna just dive back in and just show a little bit of that reporting that we showed earlier. We were on saved views earlier just to showcase
Sure.
some of Rich's point. But maybe you could just show what you've been up to, because you've got a couple of good saved views that might give
Yeah.
people some inspiration and insight of how to use that.
Sure. So I mean, we created one earlier, didn't we? We used
The
our
tier
ESG
one.
data. We pulled that all through for our tier one vendors and we filtered it. But any of the market IQ data, not necessarily the ESG tab, but any of the information from security scorecard and credit safe can be pulled through here. So you might have vendors that you want to see their cyber risk rating. And I've just created this view here of my vendors that I have connected, and you can sort these views as well based on you can sort these vendors based on like the score, like ranking them from highest to lowest if you want to see who are my arguably high risk vendors that I deal with here. So I've got some in my vendors view. So I've got cyber risk, financial risk view. And if I pull this one up, what I've combined alongside the market IQ scores for from credit safe is what's our expenditure with this vendor? Because you might be a summary of, are they a risky vendor and are we spending a lot of money with them on an annual basis? And you can combine this with the spend module if you're actually collecting details on individual expenses and direct expenditure with vendors. But at the moment, I'm just using contract value summaries here in this view. However, over on the contract one, I think this is the one you wanted to see, is a similar sort of thing, but we've got the risk scores from the vendor compared to our contractual obligations or the contracts that we have in place. So, and this, I don't know if this is what Rich might call another hidden gem as well, that you can compare vendor data with the actual contract records that you have in Gatekeeper. So you can see the cyber scores and cyber ratings that I have here that have the little vendor alongside them. These are showing that this is the cyber scores that I pulled through from security scorecard. And I've filtered this view to only show it's got hardware as well, but to show my IT and software contracts, because this could be a view that as you can see, I've called my data risks. And this is one where it's an IT related contract. I want to make sure that the cyber ratings for these software providers and IT service providers are relatively good. And I've inverse sorted this one as well. So I'm looking at my IT contracts and I'm inverse sorting to show which ones of these are actually potentially data risks that I need to be aware of and potentially start, taking mitigating risk steps for.
Yeah, no, James, appreciate that. We won't linger too much on this because I appreciate over this last year we've showed a lot of save views, and I think it is a hidden gem, especially the contract and vendor data together. I want you to maybe show everyone now how they could start using Market IQ with Market IQ Lite. Just give a little showcase of what that is, talk around it, and we'll go from there.
Sure. Okay. And this is another one that some people who, if they're following our product releases, might be aware of already. So I'll navigate over to this, another tenant that doesn't have all of the Market IQ stuff that we've just been through set up yet. But what it does have enabled is Market IQ Lite, which is the free to use version. And I did say that we do this earlier, so I'll show as well how to connect a vendor to Market IQ from the repository. I know when I talked about using it, we recommend doing it in workflows, but you may have a lot of vendors that you've already onboarded and you don't want to take them through again just to connect them. So this would be how you connect either of the modules for your pre-existing vendors, but this is what Market IQ Lite looks like. When you access the screen, this Market IQ dashboard tab here, you'll see a preview of what would be Market IQ Advanced, but you can still connect your vendors to Credit Safe and to Security Scorecard to get that data on this dashboard here. And the process is very similar to what we saw in the workflow though. So if I hit connect, and in fact, I'd left a field blank here against my vendor record. And this is just to highlight the bit that Rich mentioned earlier around the thoroughness of the data that you should collect. So against this record, I've got registration number, I've got a registered address. Gatekeeper, in fact, wouldn't let me perform the search until I confirmed the country though. So now I have confirmed that and I hit find, I should be able to connect it. Yeah, 97% confidence rate. I can hit apply. That pulls through that risk score and the credit limit for the vendor. And now I'm just going to do the same thing, but with cyber. Got the email address, so I can hit connect. And that pulls through the cybersecurity risk rating there. So it pulls through that it's a low breach probability, and it's got the low risk over on the credit rating side too. And this is the free to use version. So after you've got your vendors connected, it's still live data, like Rich has talked about. Like it's this vendor is connected to those risk feeds now. So any changes will be pulled through to this dashboard automatically. But one thing to note is that this is basically the extent of what you are getting with MarketIQ Lite. Those things like the monitoring workflow, where a drop or a significant drop, I guess you could say, in one of the risk scores, that won't be able to be trigger onto a workflow. You also won't be able to use it for the intelligent approvals thing that we saw during vendor onboarding. And similarly, I know, Daniel, you'd be upset about this, is that we can't pull this through into our into custom reports on our saved views. So this is,
I mean, it's good, right? Like for like a free use part of it, like I'm absolutely on board. I think it's incredible just to be able to get that top level data, understand like, oh, is this a low risk, or like more importantly, on the cyber side, like what is the breach probability? Like that's something that I used to have countless conversations with my infosec team around, my GC. It's the kind of thing that kept us up at night. So just getting that information like this, really cool.
If you're already performing those checks, and you can now just do them in Gatekeeper with a few clicks of a button, and it still has that element that Rich talked about, that it's not in loads of different systems now. If you're storing your vendors and your contractual obligations in Gatekeeper, makes sense to have those risk checks that you've done, some of the data in here to begin with. But yeah, it's so it's on this dashboard, and it's relatively easy to click and connect, like we just saw.
Yeah, I think the very, very important thing is this is all free, right? And all of our customers can actually start using this today. So I know Pat, one of my customers, he's asked about that. So I think the key thing to kind of differentiate is with MarketIQ Lite, so completely free, part of your package. You just need to kind of talk to your CSM, and we'll get to that in a second as well. But what you get is those two key data points against the vendor record. So with no additional investment, you can get the data for every single one of your vendors in your tenant. Obviously, if you want to upgrade to the full MarketIQ kind of advanced, then that then gives you the reporting, the advanced notifications, the approval process, that kind of stuff. But I would definitely recommend kind of getting stuck into this because it's already there. It's already kind of good data to have in mind as well. So Pat, that's answering your question that you had earlier.
And in fact, for that then, Rich, should I start
segue to the poll, right?
Yeah, it's just a really simple one, just to get a feel for the people on the call that are interested in trying out this 100% free to use version, so we know whose CSM we should get to reach out, so you can discuss getting that switched on, so you can start using it.
I think I definitely highly recommend it because, especially, I've got customers that are obviously evaluating this and seeing if this is a potential fit for their business, and this is a really low kind of easy way to kind of test that out. So I definitely recommend kind of testing out, getting that data, putting that forward to different teams, and see kind of what the fit is. Even if you don't upgrade to the full version, that's also fine. You've still got very, very important data in your tenant. So I highly recommend it if you can.
Yeah, I think if I was still a Gatekeeper customer and hadn't joined Gatekeeper, I would have been begging you for this at some point, Richard.
I mean, I've got some very, very money savvy customers, so they'll definitely be going to Lite and then clicking every single vendor. So
that's procurement.
I encourage it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, appreciate it. Awesome, guys. I'm very aware of time here because we went slightly over how long we were aiming for, but I think it was important that we covered some of the really cool stuff around MarketIQ. I just wanted to really just dive into one question. Lucy, is there a question about countries and where we how good the service is, really?
This is a good one. So does Gatekeeper plan on supporting vendors from every country with MarketIQ?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Like we work with our partners, CreditSafe and Security Scorecard on the cyber, CreditSafe on the finance. So we're fundamentally linked to their offering there. But the good news is pretty much any country in the Western world is covered. I think with regards to the credit side, 190 different countries where we can get scores in. The cyber element is pretty much everywhere in the world. And on the screen element, it's not actually bound by country or location, which is able to get that data. So it's a really good offering.
And we have just one more. How many vendors can I do this for? And is there a limit?
Is that on the MarketIQ Lite, Lucy?
I guess maybe it's Lite, because it might be people on this call who are wanting to try it out. We could, so for Lite, there's no limit. You can just go, you can ask to get it enabled, connect all your vendors. And I guess, Rich, were you about to say the answer's similar for the advanced as well, right? Like,
Well, on the light version, there's no limit because
Mhm.
it's all of those suppliers. On the advanced, very similar to how our pricing works, it's based on how many suppliers that you want to assess. So that's where there will be restrictions in place for that. But that's for the advanced, where it's still the workflows, the approvals, the automated notifications. So there's limitation on the commercial version. On the light one, yeah, you can go nuts and add it to all of them.
Excellent. I'm just seeing a question here from Patrick. James, I'm going to put you slightly on the spot. And if you can't dive into it right now, we'll follow up with Patrick after. But Patrick has asked, can you quickly show us the sanctions element, sanctioned countries? I'm believing he's referring to maybe screen and just having a little look there.
actually following it through.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can.
I'm making I'm making a few assumptions here based on the question, but it might be good just to dive in there.
Where would you like me to go?
Yeah, no, I think we'll start off here and just kind of,
Okay.
well, Rich, maybe you could jump in and just show off a little bit here.
I was going to say, I'll be speaking to Pat next week, so I can definitely show him.
That's good.
But I think the only thing to mention is it wouldn't come up on this compliance. Oh, actually, you'll get an alert if, let's say, for example, let's say Atlassian is based in, I don't know, Belarus, for example, and Belarus gets added onto the sanctions list. That's when you will get an alert come up on here. But more often than not, when you want to do a search, to the left, you can see where it says Credit Safe Protect. So you click onto that, and then you add those details in. So you add the details of the company. It could be the directors of that company. Actually, it'll do a bit of both with that, but that's where you can assess whether they're on the sanctions list, whether they're a politically exposed person. You'll be able to get all that kind of nitty-gritty data that you need.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. Awesome. Great. Guys, I think we're at time. We do have some outstanding questions in the Q&A. We're going to follow up with everyone individually. I think that's probably the best thing to do here. So please, if anyone does have any more questions, please ask them now. And we'll capture all of these questions, and we'll get either Rich, your AE, or CSM to reach out to you and feed that information back to you. Maybe we'll be able to summarize some of these questions in the email that James or Lucy that you send out after this webinar. But I just want to say, like, thank you to everyone for coming along. If you are interested in this, please reach out to your CSM. We can get them to reach out to you, and we can turn on MarketIQ Lite and get you playing around with this.
Cool. Thanks, guys.
Perfect. Thanks,
for making
everyone.
time, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.